Recording your Victories.
All right. Well, good morning to all, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with Representative Lorena Garcia. My name is Miguel Lovato with the Don L. K. Foundation. Buenos días a todos y gracias por unirse a esta conversación con la representante Lorena Garcia. Mi nombre es Miguel Lovato de la Fundación Donald K. Looks like we have a couple more folks who are still being admitted. I'll make sure they hear this next part. Wonderful. Before we begin, let me introduce B. Torres from the Community Language Co-op to share a statement about language justice and explain how interpretation will work. Antes de comenzar, permítanme presentar a B. Torres de la Community Language Co-op para que comparta una declaración sobre la justicia lingüística y explique cómo funcionará la interpretación. B.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Muchas gracias. Good afternoon, everybody. Hola, buenas tardes. My name is B. Torres. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I will be your Spanish interpreter with the Community Language Cooperative. And I want to thank you for your commitment to language justice, which means that everyone should be able to speak in the language of their heart. In a moment, we'll activate Zoom's simultaneous interpretation function, and at that time, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a globe icon. You'll click on that icon and select either English or Spanish as the language of your heart. If you do not see that icon in a moment, you will click on the three buttons or the three dots that say more, and there you should be able to select interpretation. Once you've selected the language of your heart, you'll be able to listen in either in English or through a Spanish interpretation. I want to remind folks to please speak at a conversational pace so that I'm able to provide an accurate rendition of your message. I'll repeat this in Spanish and then we can get started. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Vi Torres. Mi pronombre es ella y yo seré su intérprete con la Cooperativa Comunitaria del Lenguaje o la CLC. Y les agradecemos su compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje, lo cual significa que todos tenemos el derecho de hablar en el idioma de nuestro corazón. En un momento activaremos la función de interpretación simultánea en Zoom y aparecerá un globo terráqueo en su pantalla. Favor de hacer clic en ese icono y elija inglés o español como el idioma de corazón. Si no aparece el globo terráqueo, va a haber tres puntitos que dicen more o más. Si hace clic en esos puntitos, va a poder escoger la interpretación. Les recuerdo que por favor hablen a un ritmo de conversación para poder brindar una interpretación precisa de su mensaje. Muchas gracias. Ya podemos comenzar. Thank you very much. We can go ahead and activate interpretation now.
Miguel,
Gracias. Thank you. Sorry for that. Thank you, B. And thank you all for joining us here today. It looks like we have a lot of Sarah Johnsons who've joined us today. Our apologies for the link issue that caused that. If we can ask you to please go to your Zoom box, and if you hover over it, you should see three dots. If you click on the three dots, you should be able to go down and rename yourself to your name. So again, go to your Zoom box, click on the three dots, and you should be able to rename yourself with your name. Again, our apologies for that. Thank you all again.
Can we hold for one moment just for an interpretation issue? And just give me 1 minute, okay?
Okay, no problem.
Hey, Sarah, this is B. If you make me host, I can try to troubleshoot. I see that I'm co-host, but Zoom won't let me troubleshoot if I'm just the co-host.
Thanks, B. I'm working on it right now.
No problem. Thank you.
If you've just joined, we're troubleshooting a little bit of a Zoom issue, so hang tight. Wonderful. Thank you, B. Thank you, Sarah. Again, if you've just joined us, thank you for being here with us today. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of an issue with the Zoom link, so your name may say Sarah Johnson. You can easily change that by hovering over your Zoom box, clicking on the three dots. You may need to go down to more, and then you can rename yourself your name. So again, our apologies for that. In the chat, you'll see that there is some background information there for your reference as well. There's some information about FFN care if you're unfamiliar with FFN care. Some more information about Representative Lorena Garcia, and some more information about some recently passed bills that are all related to FFN care. This webinar is being recorded, and so you'll see that. And the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to ask Representative Garcia some questions here in the beginning for the first half. And then the second half, we will open it up to any audience members, anyone who's joined us today as an attendee, to ask questions directly. The way you will do so is to raise your hand on Zoom. There's a function there under, I believe it's reactions. If you go to reactions, you can raise hand. And what that'll do is that'll put you in line so that we can call on you to ask your question directly. Okay. So again, once we get to that part of the program today, we'll explain that again and have you all ask any questions that you want. And lastly, the chat function is disabled for like chatting between attendees, but we may put announcements there in the chat. So please keep your eye on that. So let's go ahead and begin. Representative Lorena Garcia, I want to thank you so much for not only making time for us today, but for all of the work that you have done and continue to do to advocate for FFN care, FFN providers, the children and the families that they care for. This state is very lucky to have you, and we're lucky to have you join us here today. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, thanks. It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's just jump right in. And I'd love to ask you, what is your vision for FFN care in the state of Colorado?
Oh, that's a big question, and we don't have that much time, so I'm going to keep it very, very short. Childcare is the second oldest profession on this planet, and it's second only to midwifery. And it has been an honored tradition in many of our Indigenous communities, and I would love for Colorado and the nation as a whole to value and support and compensate FFN care for being what it has been for a millennia and multiple millennia of human beings being on this planet.
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm gonna press you a little bit. Can you give us a little more of like for Colorado, for the state of Colorado, what are some ways that could play out? Like what might that look like, given that we know that there's a large focus on early childhood in the state of Colorado? So
Yeah,
with this group of caregivers.
We have a state department, and our state department has a budget of, let's say, $800 million right now, I think. Our state department is for early childhood. We know that over half of Colorado's children are in the care of FFN providers, yet less than 1% of funding is dedicated to support FFN providers. My vision is that we see more parity in funding.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for that. Well, we know that there's some things that have been happening in Colorado, and some, I would say, some wins or some successes that we have seen in FFN care in the state of Colorado. Representative Garcia, are you still there?
Yeah,
okay, there we
right
go.
here.
Frozen there for a quick second. But can you tell us about some of those recent wins, some of those successes for FFN care in Colorado? Maybe, you know, this last year and maybe even the past couple of years.
Sure. I think one of my workers in the care economy, and including FFN providers. Prior to that, we wouldn't have been able to get there had we not built up to the acknowledgement of the work that FFN providers do. And even back in 2016, when a bill was brought to expand how many children an FFN provider could care for, prior to 2016, it was 2 kids. Now it's 4 kids under 5, 2 under 2. And that alone demonstrated that the state recognized that there wasn't enough care in licensed centers and licensed facilities to care for all the children. So they had to make it legally possible for informal cares to fill the gap. And since then, we've seen more attention, specifically around the pandemic, of the contributions of FFN care. That allowed us to bring Senate Bill 199 in 2021 that removed the Social Security requirement for public benefits and licensing. And that included early childhood licensing, whether it was an actual license to be an early childhood provider or to become qualified license exempt. After that, we saw in 2022, $100 million early childhood spending bill. Of that, $7.5 million went to establishing a division for FFN in the department. And that's currently running right now, where $6.5 million of that is intended to be regranted and support expansion of programming that's supporting FFN providers. So I think the buildup of seeing what started first as a safety gap measure of let's extend the number of kids a provider can care for, to now saying let's actually support these providers, has really gotten us to a place where we're actually also able to provide some means of financial relief for these caregivers that often operate in a net negative.
Oh, thank you. Representative Garcia, you brought up in 2022 this bill that created a sort of legislated work to be done with our early childhood department specific to FFN care and FFN providers. How unique is that? Are other states doing that?
No, Colorado was the first state to do so, then Minnesota followed suit. But Colorado was the very first state to institutionalize focus on FFN care through a department or through a government agency.
Wow. I think that's big, right? I mean, that's big for us to actually have that. And some of the pieces that are a part of that are, we have someone hired on at the state to just focus on FFN care, correct? Mm-hmm. And we have, we'll get to the grants program, but there's also an advisory council for the state. And then this grant program as well that you mentioned, $6.5 million. Tell us a little bit more about that grant program. What are those grant dollars going to be supporting? When does the application come out? When can folks apply? When will grant dollars go out the door? Tell us a little bit more about that program.
Sure. So let me give a little bit of background on the FFN grant program. So in 2022, when the ARPA dollars were made available for early childhood, we were trying to figure out how do we effectively use this to also support FFN providers. We had initially wanted to turn that investment in FFN into a direct cash assistance program, because we were seeing that this was actually something that was proven effective in helping people become economically stable. The cost of that, because of different, I would honestly, I'll just name it, because of different prejudices against, at the time, FFN providers, you know, historical racism that exists and continues to exist. There was virtually zero trust that if you give FFN providers that are largely immigrant and refugee providers, the department was wanting to create a whole bunch of red tape and like all these things that providers would have to jump through, which would have cost half of that. And so we thought that's not effective. So we need to change it. So after stakeholding and figuring out how to best do this in the short amount of time we had, we thought, well, let's issue a grant program to FFN serving organizations so they can expand their work and continue doing what they do the best. And in that, provide up to $950 worth in materials grants. So not cash, but materials that amount up to $950. So when that grant program was ready to go, or when the bill passed, there was a couple barriers that came in, or a couple of situations that came into play. And the first one immediately was, if you all remember, the federal government kind of backtracked on how quickly or how long we had to spend ARPA dollars. So first it was different pots of money we're able to spend through 2026, but then it was like, no, you have to spend it by 2024. And so this money was coming out of the money that was supposed to be spent in 2024. So the department went in overload mode, trying to figure out how do we solve this so we don't lose this $7.5 million. And I got into the legislature in 2023 and was able to work effectively with the Joint Budget Committee to shift the funds that were going to be used for the FFN program. We reallocated the FFN program funds into a different early childhood pot that could be spent by 2024. And then the state dollars that had to be matched were able to basically serve as the container that would allow us to use the rest of the ARPA dollars through 2026. So after that happened, then the department was like, okay, now we still have this money. Now let's start rolling. It took a while to hire the FFN administrator. Once the FFN administrator was hired, the department wanted to develop the RFP to issue the grant dollars directly to FFN serving organizations. But given the state's ridiculously terrible procurement process, it would have barred many of our FFN serving organizations that don't have, let's say, on staff or contract grant writers that maybe don't have experience working with government entities, are too small to be able to to justify like the 30-40 hours it takes to fill out a state RFP. So after developing this initial RFP, the state said, you know what, this isn't going to work. So they had to start over. And they started over and they thought, let's go through an intermediary. And so through the intermediary, the organization that I run, the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition, applied and we became the intermediary. We've been hard at work negotiating the contract to make sure that it is at a place where the application is open to groups who are not, let's say, who don't even have a 501c3. We have been working really hard to make sure that if people have never had experience even in grant writing or tracking, that we'd be able to offer them technical assistance, that they could still qualify. And after all this time, the application will be released on July 15th. Anyone who applies, it can be a network, it can be an organization, you have to have that experience in FFN to qualify. If you don't have certain requirements, because these are federal dollars, contact us and we will still work with you to make sure that you still get these funds. So one of the things that we really want very clear and very like up front and center is that you don't have to be a big organization that has these government grant dollar experience that you can actually get these dollars to grow your programs, to support FFN providers, even as an informal network.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you for that background in the evolution. And this gets to like why some of these things just take a long time, even though there was willingness, even though the law was passed, you know, a couple of years ago now. Yeah, thanks for adding a little bit of flavor as to why. Super excited that July 15th is less than a month away. And to find that information, go to the CSPC website. Is that right? Okay. And I think there's be an email distribution as well, correct?
Yeah, so we'll be sending out a press release and information. We'll have the FFN grant program page live. I think the Monday the 8th, if you will, to give people some opportunity to take a look at it. If you are wanting to chat with our FFN grants program manager, you can call the office, and I can't put my information there because I can't message to everybody, but I'm sure after this, or maybe we can figure out if Sarah, you could put in that information, we can figure out how to get it to everybody. But if you're not on the CSPC listserv, don't worry, we know who you are, and we will still reach out to you and make sure you know and you have the information that you need to apply.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll make sure to get the word out to our networks as well. And we think that this is huge and super exciting. Last question related to this. When will dollars go out the door to support these training and support organizations?
At the very latest, November 1st.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll do, last second, I lied. Another question. Is there going to be another round, or will it just be this one round of applications?
We'll have 2 rounds for sure. One will be this one that starts in July. Then we'll have another one that will open in March. And then if there's funds remaining after those first 2 rounds, we may open a much shorter 3rd round. But that would be for those who are currently funded under the 1st or the 2nd round.
Got it.
So those would be extension grants.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that information. I often get asked questions about the grants program. When is it coming? What's the timeline? Those types of things. So thank you very much. Again, everyone, we'll make sure to get the information, contact information out for the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition. And hopefully you all can sign up to be on their listservs to get the latest updates there. Representative Garcia, let me stay on this track of legislation that has passed. This very last legislative session, we saw a couple of bills passed that were related to FFN care. One of those was a tax credit for care providers. And we know that that is also an opportunity to provide some direct support for FFN providers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program?
Yeah, I want to say the only reason why we were able to do this was because the Department of Early Childhood had already passed an early childhood tax credit. And through this, they were able then to all of the licensed providers that were registered under the PDIS system, the department would issue a certification that would then go to the Department of Revenue to say, yes, this is a qualified early childhood worker and they qualify for this tax credit. Had that system not existed, we would have never been able to include FFN providers into that same pathway. So in order for an FFN provider to qualify for the tax credit, they have to first enroll into the PDIS system as an FFN provider, and then they have to file their taxes. And there's no citizenship requirement on it. We know that many undocumented immigrants file taxes anyway. And so this is just one way of saying, thank you for your work. The first tax credit will be issued in 2026 for the 2025 tax year.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, that was going to be a question I had. How much will the tax credit be for, or up to?
It will be $1,200 per care worker.
Got it. Got it. So again, let me make sure I'm underscoring what I heard you say. In order to be eligible, the FFN provider must register through the Colorado Department of Early Childhood's PDIS system, which is their professional development information system, right? Anyone can register, right? Anyone can go on there and have access to any of the professional development resources that are there. It's great to see so many of those being translated into Spanish as well. But so that's the way to get into the system. And then they have to file their taxes. And through that tax filing, that's when they'll apply for the credit, correct?
Correct. Yes, you will not get the tax credit unless you file your taxes.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. And again, filing those in 2026 for the 2025 year. Okay, awesome, awesome. Another question I had about this last legislative session, we saw this massive overhaul of the, I'll probably say, antiquated CCAP system. And thank you for leading that charge. We also know that in that bill were some pieces that would directly affect FFN providers. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, I want to first start by just like lifting up Healthier Colorado and their work in leading that charge, Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition, and the many of you on this call right now that were part of that coalition. This bill came about from two different ideas at the same time. One was, how do we make sure that Colorado demonstrates support for the federal rules? How do we ensure that we actually do them and that we show the federal government we are committed to this? The other one was, how do we actually serve more kids? So the ideas were, how do we expand eligibility? We had decided, can we expand eligibility to early childhood workers? So just because they're workers that they then qualify for CCAP. And then also expanded eligibility for parents who are going through substance use disorder treatment. While we were able to codify all of these brilliant new regulations and these new rules into CCAP that are very, very expensive, when implementation time comes, if the federal government doesn't support federal implementation or the state level implementation, we're going to have to make the extremely difficult decision of deciding how many of the already only 10% of eligible CCAP kids are not going to be able to participate in the program. In addition to that, some of the really exciting things that came out of the bill were creating a system, a way for CDEC to have to create a system for providers that want to be CCAP providers but are qualified license exempt. So as many of you know, in order for a qualified license exempt provider, this is somebody who's not licensed, but they're still safety checked, they're background checked, to be able to receive CCAP dollars, the family has to initiate, the family has to declare them as their child care provider. Whereas in the licensed world, a provider can say, I am a CCAP provider. And so families who qualify for CCAP can go and say, my kid has CCAP and here's the exchange and whatever. We wanted to make that also a possibility for qualified license exempt providers. And now it will be. The other thing that came out of it is a study and I guess like a study essentially of how do we de-link a very important, essentially like vital to childhood development program, the child and adult food care program, from what is right now connected to CCAP. So that means that at this moment right now, if an FFN provider wants to be able to get a small reimbursement for the food that they pay out of their own pockets for the kids in their care, they have to become CCAP eligible first. Now, here's the thing, is that federally, CACFP doesn't have any of those regulations there. They don't declare or say that this has to be left to licensed childcare providers. The state of Colorado is making that a rule. So this will now require CDHS or CDPHE, excuse me, that is in charge of administering CACFP and CDEC to work together to come up with a way to delink these two so that any provider that's caring for kids can qualify for CCAP. So this means that they don't have to go through all of the other barriers that it takes to be, for example, a CCAP provider if they don't want to, but that they still can benefit from the nutritional programs that exist specifically for children, no matter where they are.
Wow, wonderful. Well, again, congratulations on, making some progress here on the larger CCAP world, and specifically the impacts on FFN providers. And so great to hear these, and look forward to hearing more about what comes from the study.
Hey, Miguel, I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
One of the really cool things about the incredible community of early childhood advocates and leaders that we have in this state has really elevated Colorado to be a leader across the nation in different things. For example, we're the only state that has a real estimate of what the cost of these new rules that the federal government has put down on states is going to cost. We know that through 1223, which was the bill that adopted those rules into our state statutes, through the fiscal note process, we know what the tech upgrades are going to cost us. We know what just the cost for CCAP reimbursement is going to cost. And it's about $90 million just in the first year. And
Wow.
so I want to put that plug because any of you and all of you can make this a reality that the federal government invests. And that means that we have to keep on our federal delegation that when they're looking at the next budget that comes in September, that they are pushing for effective and large amounts of early childhood investment so that states can do this responsibly. I mean, the reality is, like, what good is investing all of these new rules when we're serving less kids?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that plug. Let me just underscore what I heard. So in terms of an FFN provider wanting to accept CCAP, the old way is that they had to have a family initiate that process. What was just passed is that FFN provider can now initiate that, correct? And I assume
as soon as they figure out their system, as soon as CDEC
They
figures out their
certainly- okay.
system.
That was going to be, yeah. Any timeline on that piece?
I don't have
Okay.
one.
Okay, that's fine. And then the second piece I heard you talk about was this study about delinking or decoupling eligibility for that federal food program, the CACFP, from the current system where they have to first become qualified to accept CCAP, and then they can access the food program, correct? And again, there's a study that is looking at delinking those two.
Yeah.
And again, any timeline on that?
No.
Okay.
I know that the department and several others, including you all, are already in the process of getting folks together to start working on that. So.
Yep. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that. Well, I know that we have folks who are itching to ask some questions, and I have some more questions here in case folks don't have those, but I would love to turn it over to folks to ask any questions right now. We are using the raise hand function, and Sarah, I can't see everybody here, so if you can call on folks, we can have folks, come off mute, and we'll have you ask the question directly. So, Sarah, can you help us out here?
Absolutely. I'm looking for hands right now. So if you do have a question, please do raise your hand.
Looks like we have three.
Yep. So I'm going to ask Anissa to unmute, and we're going to spotlight you, Anissa.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you, Representative Garcia, about all these efforts. And we know the FFN providers are achieving great things in Colorado now. And I've been working with the FFN for a couple of years. And one of the things that really amazed me is that they can apply for the CCAB and be exempt providers. Now for the time being, I'm working with 4 FFN providers who wants to be exempt providers. The point that when we came, there's like we are not sure if there's going to be change or not, but previously, like when it was approved that the FFN can be exempt providers, the amount is being paid for the license, like the CCAP paid to the licensed family home providers is less, it's not the same as the FFN, which one of them was yesterday. I was helping a lady and she said how it's an important question because they want to know financially, this is the amount of time I'm going to spend at home taking care of these children, giving them, the quality care, and I need to know at the end of month what I'm going to do. And then we were not figuring out the information, but it was kind of half of it. It might be $18 a day, or maybe if it's a full, it's not really, the exact number, but the idea is half of what is to the licensed child home care. So is there a possibility, is there a chain of it in the future now or in the future? Are you looking at it? Because one of the ladies said that I really would love to be devoting my time to this, but my husband is arguing with me, say that at the end of the month, we need to look in our income and stuff. So just focusing on this part and if there is any change. Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Benedris, it is actually a huge issue, and specifically for qualified licensed exempt and also just for licensed providers. The CCAP reimbursement rates across the board are just very low and are not actually, they don't match the actual cost. So a couple of things that are happening at the federal level is there are changes that will allow states to set their rates at the actual cost of care. But then the other thing is how do we support, but that's for licensed providers. So the other question is how do we support that for qualified licensed exempt? There is energy and there's talks already around how do we do that? As you all know, we have our state, while we are the 9th wealthiest state in the union, we have the most restrictive revenue generating tax policies. We are not able to, as a legislature, increase revenue for things like this. We have to go through the ballot. It has to be a vote of the people. And in that, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to take a tax credit to the ballot box. But even within that law called Tabor, when we take a tax revenue initiative to the ballot, there's a couple psychological things that anti-government proponents that passed Tabor knew would impact the decision. Number one is that all those questions have to be in capital letters. We all know that capital letters is synonymous with being yelled at. The second thing is the structure of the actual question has to have, shall the state raise taxes by? When people say, you're going to raise my taxes, no. Instead of starting with, should we invest in early childhood by raising taxes, for example? So we have a lot of challenges when it comes to being able to effectively serve our communities. This past year, instead of being able to use the nearly $2 billion in revenue that the state received through income taxes and sales tax and service tax, like in increasing reimbursement rates, we had to give it back. And that's actually one of the ways that we were able to do the child care tax credit, because we were able to reallocate some of that money, nearly $2 billion, that would go back to taxpayers instead of investment into our services was through targeted tax relief, like a tax credit. So all that to say, yes, there's the understanding, there's the desire, we have the will to change it. Is it going to be easy right now? No. Can the state do it in this next year? No. Is it something that local communities can do? Yeah, that too, because every local community has to invest in CCAP. They have to make a certain match. They can run local revenue generating initiatives as well. But again, it's all through the ballot box. So as long as we have Tabor, any of this like effective investment in the social safety nets of our community are really challenging to fund at the levels they should be.
Thank you, Representative Garcia, and thank you for the question. Just a quick follow-up on that, Representative Garcia, we know that the rates, the CCAP rates for FFNs who are qualified exempt varies widely all across the state, but county by county. Is there any fix for that?
I would think there should be, right? We should have a fix for that. I think one of the things is we also do have to be cognizant of cost of care. So cost of care, for example, in the metro area is more expensive than, let's say, in you know, Fort Lewis. And the reason for that is because, or Fort Morgan, excuse me. And the reason for that is because the cost of living is more expensive in certain areas. And so CCAP reimbursement rates are based on the market cost. But if we go, like when we go into the actual cost modeling, you take into consideration what is rent, what is the cost of the space, what are the materials, what is the food cost, how much you have to pay people. So I think it's appropriate to have a floor that's actually livable and effective. So not the $18, and in some counties it's $16, but to have it more realistic of like, it actually costs and this isn't even real, but I'm going to say $50, right? It still is more than $50 to care for a kid for a day. But if we have a floor that's more reasonable, it'll allow counties to give back more if they need to for cost of living.
Got it. Thank you. Sarah, I think I can see the hands here now. So can I call on Beth Melton?
Yep, I'll have her lower her hand and let's spotlight Beth.
Oh, spotlighting. Hi, thank you. Thanks for being here, Rep. Garcia. I appreciate it. Always love listening to your perspective on these things. I am working with a community that is really interested in sort of formalizing their support for FFN care. I know you have some experience in thinking about FFN networks and kind of what that looks like. And I'm curious what your recommendations might be for a community that's interested in, like I said, sort of formalizing support for FFN, and what resources might be available to them to do that.
I think one piece, if it's if you're looking at a local community that's like a government, right? If it's like a county or a municipality that wants to formalize their support, the number one thing that we all know that demonstrates where our dollars are spent, our moral documents, are our budgets. And so if these counties make it a permanent line item of, we are going to support FFN providers in this way, it could be supporting their early childhood council in establishing like FFN for FFN's sake programming. It could be the investment in the local organizations that are training FFN providers. It could be FFN direct cash assistance. It could be, it could be, so Denver invests heavily in FFN. They seed funded the Connection FFN, which is the first like hub of FFN providers that's informal. It's not a training, it's not anything. It's like a drop-in center, if you will, to support FFN providers if they need help, technical assistance, networking. Things like that really go a long way, but ultimately formalizing support for FFN comes with the big bucks.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you, Beth, for that question. Just want to say if there's any, if there are any questions in Spanish, please feel free. You can ask those questions in whatever language, English or Spanish anyway, that you feel comfortable, and we do have interpretation here. So let me call on Lauren.
Thank you. Really appreciate the conversation, Representative Garcia, very informative. I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this question, but I am curious if it was challenging for the state to justify using an intermediary to spend down those ARPA dollars rather than running a competitive RFP, since it sounded like it would have been really challenging for those FFN serving orgs to apply to the state, but it was easier to use that intermediary, kind of what that process looked like in terms of really justifying that decision.
So the justification there came from the idea that if the state themselves did their competitive RFP for the specific grant dollars, many of the organizations and networks that serve FFN providers, that alone would be disqualified. So shifting to an intermediary, that process was also competitive. Like they opened an RFP, several different groups, organizations, and foundations applied to be the intermediary. And then the requirement there is to still have a competitive grant process, but there aren't the same types of barriers and restriction procurement process that exists with the state. So it won't take as long. So like we will, even though it feels like it's taking forever just to get to this place, trust me, I know. But like it'll be something where, for example, you can submit an application, and let's say you forgot something or you missed something, you're not automatically disqualified like you would be at a state process. Or let's say you misunderstood a question, like we have the ability to call and say, hey, let's talk through this. Is this really what you meant? Whereas in the state, it would say, sorry, X, kick them out. So that was really the idea of like, how do we truly get these dollars that are intended to go to the FFN serving organizations that are in these communities that are serving these providers, the dollars that they need to expand their programming.
Thank you, Lauren, for that question. Just one little piece I would add to that, given that we were involved in some of this as well in terms of like selecting an intermediary. And I think you just hit on this, Representative Garcia, is that the state does a good job of working with systems and things like that. Organizations like Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition are much better positioned to work with community, to work directly with community. So, having trusted relationships and knowing all of the things that you just described, that you might need to be a little flexible about how you work with folks who've never accessed state dollars before. That's why it makes sense in my mind to have an intermediary versus having the state directly work with those folks. So again, if you have other questions, please throw those in there. Representative Garcia, I'd like to ask you, what barriers do you see still existing for FFN providers and FFN care? And kind of attached to that, like what's next? What's the next thing that needs to be tackled? What next barrier needs to be obliterated?
There's still a massive perception problem with FFN providers. It's seen as a last resort instead of recognized as sometimes this is actually the first choice of families. The cost will always continue to be a barrier for the FFN providers themselves. There is one of the biggest barriers is how do we effectively support FFN providers for being FFN providers? There's a lot of energy and a lot of movement of like, yes, let's go reach these FFN providers and make them licensed. One of the challenges with that is not anything against licensing. It's that licensed providers serve a different population and have a different model than FFN providers. FFN providers are very much more focused on cultural relevancy, linguistics. They also serve a different type of continuity of care. You can have a FFN provider that will receive like a 2-month-old or a 2-week-old baby, and they'll care for that child until they're 12, 13, 14. When you're in a licensed center, you change, let's say a center, you change classrooms, you change teachers depending on your age. If you're in a home-based childcare, licensed home-based childcare center, it's the same thing. You're licensed by number of kids, by age groups. So you don't have the same level of continuity of care that you do in license as you do in FFN that you have in FFN that you would in license. And so that's one of the things where we just have to recognize that is such a huge value add for many families, that we can't lose that. And so we can't be saying that the solution to supporting these providers is pushing them into licensed care. The solution is to acknowledge and recognize the different mixed delivery models of how care is given.
It sounds like you're talking about stigma and addressing stigma around FFN care. How is that addressed, or what might that look like? Is that public awareness? Is that, other ways of addressing that? What might that look like?
Well, definitely public awareness. But I think you're asking like the age-old question of how do we address racism and sexism? The contributions of women of color, while they are like the bread and butter of community building, are always devalued because they're just expected. I mean, we've had, even in the state legislature, we have people voting against like a care economy tax credit, voting against improving CCAP. Why? Because women belong in the home. Like that was literally the statement that one of our, now thank goodness he's not there anymore, but one of our former representatives said. And so it's the system of like, one, when we hear things like that, when we ourselves start thinking and like fall into this narrative of like, well, licensed care is safer and better, we have to recognize it's actually not always. There isn't a better, there isn't a safer. We should not be putting these judgments on the choices that parents make. And we have to uplift and uphold and recognize and remind everybody, like I did this morning, remind us all that FFN care is the second oldest profession of the planet. And look where we are now. Obviously, it's not unsafe, like where we are.
Related, access to food. I know that we've heard from several FFNs that one of their highest priorities is access to food. You talked about trying to address this from getting better access to the federal food program. Are there other ways that you think that we can improve access to healthy food for FFNs and the children in their care?
The first thing is we have to make FFN providers eligible for CACFP. It's the lowest hanging fruit right now. Second, we have to work at the federal level to reduce the entries to barrier for the CACFP program. The Child and Adult Food Care Program is also a reimbursable program. It's not something many of us who are on this call also, like our nonprofit workers, we know what it's like to get a grant up front, and we know what it's like to have to get a reimbursable grant. And it is so hard to operate on reimbursable dollars because you have to have that capital ahead of time. And to be able to invest in healthy nutrition is expensive. All of you know that. Expensive for your families. Now imagine if you're having to quadruple your grocery load because you're caring for 3 kids. So we have to shift how CACFP even operates, or work at a state level to provide like upfront seed dollars. We invest in businesses all the time. Why can we not look at FFN providers as another business investment?
Thank you for that. again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will call on you. I did get a private chat asking again about the deadline for the FFN Supports and Training Grant Program. That will be released on July 15th. Representative Garcia, how long do folks have to apply? Like, what's the timeline? When is it due?
I believe it's August 15th.
Okay. Okay. So again, keep a lookout for the RFP or the application to be released July 15th. And folks have roughly about a month. And if we get any updated information, we'll make sure to get that out to folks in terms of dates. Okay. So thank you for that. Representative Garcia, you started off by mentioning some of the other states that are doing some things around FFN care as well. You mentioned Minnesota. We know that there are a few states that are doing some things as well. In your seat as part of our state legislature, do you get asked questions from folks in other states around FFN supports in Colorado, what we're doing in Colorado? And if so, what are some of those questions, or maybe what are some of the things that differentiate us from some of those other states?
I would say one of the biggest differentiators, and that was very clear for us also as a state, is you have to have willing leadership in your early childhood department or office. I can guarantee we'd probably be like halfway this far if we didn't have people like Mary Alice Cohen, like when she was leading the Office of Children Affairs or Office of Early Childhood. Without her desire of saying, yes, we need to do this, and pushing internally, it would have been so much harder for us. So that's one thing that I often tell our other partners, like, you need to start educating your department leadership on the impact and support and the reason why FFN providers are so integral to the fabric of society. Because if you are continuing to fight against the agency that has to adopt and implement, we'll be where we were back in 2018. And look at how far we've come because we have somebody who is supportive. And then being able to demonstrate, local investments like Jefferson County and Denver and Boulder, and saying like they are investing in early childhood, or they're investing in FFN care in early childhood. And this is how. It's more persuasive as well for the state to say, okay, yeah, this seems to be important.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sounds like that's a key ingredient, having a champion somewhere in state government to help move this forward. So thank you for that. Folks, everyone who've joined us today, thank you for being here. We are just about to wrap up. I want to thank you, Representative Lorena Garcia, for joining us today, for all the work that you do on behalf of FFN providers and the families that they care for in the state of Colorado. I want to thank B. Torres from the Community Language Co-op for putting in the hard work to interpret for us today. Thank you. And again, we will follow up with any information, some follow-up information around dates that we know around the grants program or anything else that we want to follow up with. We have you all on the email list. The recording, of course, will be made available, and we'll send that to you as well. So just want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for your advocacy for FFN providers. Take care and have a wonderful day.